I've been in Italy for a month, so I'm picking up some Italian, aka speaking in Spanish, which doesn't sound as good. So some of you might know me as Natasha the robot. I do a lot of Swift stuff. I work for myself, so when people ask me for my title, I just call myself Swift Robot because I don't know what the title is. But I run my blog, Natasha the Robot. I have a Swift newsletter. I have a Swift job board, and as my alter identity, I also am a digital nomad, and I just travel around the world while working from my computer. So I've been doing that around about a year. And I'm really passionate about learning other cultures. Italy is amazing. Wherever I am, I try to learn about the local cultures. And a lot of times it actually kind of like puts a mirror to myself and takes assumptions that I have about myself and the world and like reverses them when people look at me weird for doing simple things that I'm used to. So these are my two big passions, and I kind of combined that, and I run the Try Swift conference internationally. This year I've had one in Japan and New York, and I'm scouting out other locations as well, because why not? It's fun. I like Swift. I like I like travel. It's kind of how I make friends, go to different conferences, organize conferences. So I've been having lots of fun. So definitely say hi to me when you see me. But today I'm gonna kind of skip talking about Swift as much. All the code is still in Swift, so that's good. But I'm gonna talk about apps and the app ecosystem. So there are a lot of apps, actually like over 2 million apps in the App Store. So thanks everyone. Thanks everyone. But that creates a really big problem. And the problem is that first, most people like download 0 apps per month. So if you're like 2,053rd app, it's really hard to get people to download it. And then the next part, even if you do get people to download your app, retention is just horrible. So pretty much within the first month, you're gonna lose like 95% of your users, or at least like people who download it, they're gonna stop using your app, most likely in the first month. So who remembers Pokemon Go? Okay. But it's a game, so it's a little bit different, but it came out, it got all this hype. Like I used it, I'm not a Pokemon person at all. I got some people help me like figure out, including Ayaka here, how to use it, and I used it for a month, and then, okay, like I moved on with my life. So probably that month is about good. I know some people still use it, and it's coming out in other countries, so it has better retention than most other apps. But that's kind of the point. If like an app like Pokemon Go can lose retention, what happens to your to your apps? It's a sad, scary story. But I'm not here to be depressing. So I'm going to talk about, my talk is really about thinking differently about the apps, and it's basically the way that Apple is also thinking about apps and reframing what apps actually are. So instead of thinking of apps as these things where the user goes to their phone, they download it, they click on it, and now they're in your app, I urge you to think bigger. Think of apps as like a web of interconnected features that are kind of everywhere versus just when the user is using the app. So really think differently. In fact, and this does not apply to games, because I think you do need to be in the app for most games, but if you're building kind of a product app, I urge you to think of how you can get the user to use your app without ever opening it. So that should be your new goal, and that's where Apple is heading. So if you think of like a few things that Apple has released recently, that you would consider small, cool features, but you should be thinking these as like the main interfaces for your app now. So the first one is notifications. The Apple Watch came out, and it has these tiny, tiny icons. And if you ever want to go on the watch and like open the app, it's a horrible user experience. It's not fun. So instead, the Apple Watch has become like a fitness and a notification device. You get different notifications. Maybe you can reply within the app. Maybe you can get more information. So I think the Apple Watch has really pushed the notification kind of theme and showing the importance of it. You can now walk in the world, you get your important information without ever having to look at your phone. Well, this year with iOS 10, Apple has expanded notifications to include notification extensions. So when you're thinking of these features, when the user never has to open the app, think of this interface. I never have to open the Messages app. I can reply to my friend right in the extension. So this is what you should be thinking as well. The next thing is speech recognition. I can rant like on and on about how horrible removal of the headphone jack is. So happy to talk about that afterwards. And it's really annoying because you don't have, you can't charge and listen to music at the same time. And I travel a lot and I use my phone a lot. I need to do both. So it's very frustrating. But then I saw this article from Slate, and it's really like changed my mind about what the AirPods are. Instead of thinking of them as just like wireless headphones, think of them as Apple's version of Google Glass. You know, instead of like these ugly spectacles that like people can see, you have these discrete little things in your ear, and their battery lasts all day. So the goal is for you to put these on in your ear and have them on all day, and then you can invoke Siri there. So there's that extension into speech recognition for your app. Now the user never has to open the app. If they want an Uber, they ask Siri to get them an Uber. There's no app interface, right? There's just that feature that's there. So, the next step is going to be chips in your brain, but this is kind of the first part from Apple. And the interesting part is I thought AirPods come with your iPhone, but they actually have to buy them separately because they're like a whole different product category. So there's like iPhone, and then there's like AirPods, which is a computer of the future. But right now it's not that great. And if you have, an accent, if you're not a native speaker, Siri isn't that great. And I actually don't like Siri, don't like to use it. It doesn't understand me. But if you think about the future, there was this fascinating quote in Mary Meeker's Internet report that basically says that we underestimate the speech recognition, the difference between 95% and 99% accuracy. So as speech recognition improves and Apple gets us used to having these AirPods in our ear, it's really going to be game-changing. We're all going to be walking around like asking Siri for stuff. So this is definitely something to consider, where your app is not something the clicker the person clicks, but if they need something, Siri will be there and they're going to hook onto your app and get the information that the user needs. And right now, the Siri intents are very limited. You can only do so many things. But if you think, of Apple and if they can get this right while speech accuracy is not great, and then they can add things as speech accuracy improves, and they can hook into everyone's app, it becomes this powerful interface for your app that's not the traditional main app. Finally, extensions. So this is basically Apple telling us, like, move out of the app. There's a whole world out there. This is the maps. So if you have, Open Table app to book reservations, you search for a restaurant, and Open Table can hook up into this Maps app, which has a lot more retention rate than your app, and it can give you a relevant UI to do what the user wants to do. The same, with iMessage apps, you can build gelato with your friends. But the main thing here with iMessage apps that's really groundbreaking is that your friend does not have to have the app installed. So they can interact with your app. So now you have this whole other acquisition channel where people can interact with your app without ever downloading it. And this is the weather app, the iMessage app, that I'm impressed by, because you never have to open the weather app. If you want to look up the weather and share it with your friend, you just send it to them. You don't have to go to the app, look up the weather, go to iMessage, search it. They made it very convenient to use their app as a feature, without anyone having to actually annoyingly use their app. And finally, stickers. So even if you can't maybe hook into iMessage yet, or you're not sure, this is Yelp stickers. So I wouldn't think of Yelp as something that will have stickers, but they're very cute and they're great for branding. And I think stickers are really easy to laugh off because they're sort of silly. But consider this quote from Andreessen Horowitz. So they're talking about Line Messenger, which is the most popular messaging app in Japan. And for this app, it took them, first 2 million users, it took them 4 months to get to 2 million. But after they added stickers, it took them 2 days to get to the next million. So people love stickers. If you can get stickers into your app, that's really huge, branding opportunity, and it's a great way for other people to know about your app without ever downloading it. Oh yeah, and once they made stickers, they now make $270 million in profit. So there's a lot of money in stickers. So definitely something to consider extending your app into. So this is just what Apple has announced up to date. You can already kind of move your app out from your little box to a bunch of notifications, to Maps, to iMessage, to all these other things. But what's the future? So if anyone follows Android, Android this year announced instant apps. And the idea behind those is that the user doesn't even have to download your app. If they're on a website and they need to pay for parking, for example, it will download only the feature of the app that's necessary for that one interaction. So again, when you're thinking of your app as a set of features, we can now move into that instant apps directions that Android has, where let's say the user is on your website, they click to maybe book a restaurant, well, it opens up to OpenTable feature of booking the restaurant and ignores everything else. That way you can download the app, that little feature, as quick as possible, and the user can have a native experience without ever having your app even installed on the phone. So seeing that from Android, and seeing Apple already even doing that with iMessage a little bit, where the other person doesn't have to have the app installed to see it, that I think is the future. So that's definitely something to think about this year, so you're not maybe surprised next year at WWDC. So hopefully you take that from this was scary to the challenging part. Okay, this is a challenge and I have a whole year before the next WWDC to keep, to optimize my app. So how do you do this? What if you want to be ready, or if you want to take advantage of these features? So I came up with 3 things that stood out to me for things you can do, but of course, there's more. I'm sure once you start thinking about the idea of apps being a framework of interconnected features versus the one little app on your phone, then you're going to start coming up with ways to optimize your app for that, for doing that. So I think most obvious thing is frameworks. When you have so I mentioned iMessage and I mentioned Siri a little bit, I mentioned notifications, but there are actually so many extensions they couldn't even be screenshot for the slide. So you have to kind of scroll up, and there's a lot more extensions that Apple has beyond the ones I mentioned. And these are just for iOS. So if you're building all these extensions and building into all these little features into different corners of the ecosystem, you're going to have a lot of duplicate code. And you're especially on the model layer. So this is where frameworks come in. To create a framework, it's actually pretty simple. You just create a new project, select Cocoa Touch framework. The key is if you are using it in extensions, you have to select this app extensions, allow extensions only API. And that makes sure that your extension, you're not bringing in any system APIs that your extension doesn't have. So this is kind of the little you might not know about this, or I didn't know about this feature. So once you do that, if you take out your whole model layer and throw it into a framework, the next thing you'll probably have that'll be annoying is just access controls. In your own app, you have internal access controls. It's only available to your module. Well, in Swift 3, there's now five levels of controls. There's open, public, internal, file, private, and private. So if you're just building your app, you probably don't have to worry about public too much. But as soon as you switch to a framework, you have to start thinking, should I make it open or public? What's the difference? Well, the big difference is that with public is the same as final. If you make a class public, then nothing can subclass it. With open, it could be subclassable, they can override it. But you don't want your extensions overriding things and have different things in different extensions. That's probably not the point of your framework, especially as you're making just the model layer framework specific to your app versus maybe a public, something you open source. So definitely consider making it public as much as possible and not open. That's it's kind of annoying that Swift has all these features, but it's also actually really nice because it makes you think, and it forces you to really consider which access level you want. The next thing to consider are app groups. So the model layer, if you just put that into your framework, that's just the schema for your app. That doesn't contain any data. But if you do have core data or you have some documents that you want to share across your extensions, then the way to do that is through app groups. And app groups are pretty simple. I don't know. If you get them to work, they're pretty simple. They're kind of painful. But in theory, you just have an identifier. And now when you need to have a shared file, you can just kind of get a file manager, get it from this little container. It kind of creates a little container of your data that you can access from everywhere that has your app group. And you can do the same thing for user defaults, because you can't forget that. If the user is logged in your iOS app, they're not going to be logged in into your extension. So you have to kind of share data from user defaults in a container as well. Alternatively, you can use the iCloud key value storage. So you can share the same user defaults across multiple devices, which is much nicer, and you don't have to deal with the app groups. But of course, now we also have different platforms. So you might have your model layer that you want to be the same on your watch and TV OS. So how do you build multi-platform framework? I think it's pretty hacky, but this blog post is pretty good by Bassam Amara. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the key is you have to create a cross-platform project, add your frameworks there for each one, watchOS, tvOS, iOS. And then you kind of create the sources folder where you copy all the same files in there. And then you configure the project file for each framework to point to the sources folder. So it's kind of ugly, but it works. There's also a way to make just one framework for everything if you play around with file paths. So this is from Max Howell. You can read about that, you can support multiple platforms. So that's definitely something to consider, whether you're making your app only for iOS and all the extensions there, versus if you're planning to do it on watchOS and tvOS. So frameworks are awesome. It keeps your code dry. You don't repeat yourself, but you do need to use app groups. I recommend using the iCloud key value store. And they could potentially be cross-platform, so it saves a lot of development time. Once you go through the pain of extracting it, you can now move fast to add these extensions everywhere, and it's going to be a lot easier for you. Next thing I want to talk about is sign-in. So this is something that makes me mad. And the main thing is, as you think of your app as a set of interconnected features, really consider which features need sign-in and which do not. And the reason is when you're thinking of external users, the users when you iMessage and they don't need the app downloaded, do they need to be signed in? Well, I think most apps don't. This is Quora Q&A, question and answer website. When you download it, this is the first screen you see. Well, it's a question and answer site. I can browse it and I can read answers and questions without needing to log in. Sure, if you want me to upvote or if you want me to create an answer or question, make me log in. But I can do a lot in Quora without ever logging in. Same thing for Pinterest. Like I've actually done this before. I go to Pinterest for something and then I look at it because it's all pretty pictures. So I end up looking at it for like an hour because you just click on something and then it shows you something else pretty. So all of that is without logging in that I can do. Sure, if I want to pin something or create my own pin board, that's a feature that requires login, but most features or a lot of features do not. I see that with e-commerce site. I want to buy shoes. Well, and you need to log in to look at shoes? Like, no, when I go to a store, I don't need to log in. I just go in. And in fact, they did research and they asked, why do people abandon checkout? And like 35% of people said they're asked to create an account. So these are customers that are ready to give you money. They look through the site, they found stuff, they want to give you money, and then you're like, hey, log in. Well, that's not needed for this feature. So really consider that as if you think of the future of iOS as something where it could be little feature flows, what is needed to log in? This is Foursquare, so this is a good example of a feature that does not need to be logged in. I came to Verona. Foursquare knows that, hey, location-wise, it does not need to know who I am, but it knows location-wise that, hey, I'm in Verona. Well, it gave me the top things to do. The first one was like going to a garden. So yesterday I went to the garden and it was beautiful. So this is a great example of how you can take advantage of creating a feature that's very powerful and translates into real-world applications for users without ever having the person actually proactively log in and search for things. Same thing for iMessage. OpenTable, I think, has a really good distinction between that which features need sign-in, which do not. For example, if me and my friends in iMessage are texting and selecting a restaurant, well, we don't need to be logged in for that. We can upvote a restaurant, we can do all these things. But as soon as I need to book the restaurant, then it'll ask me to log in. Okay, at that point, I'm a happy customer. I'm like, okay, this makes sense to me why I'm logging in. But I was able to use the app very powerfully without ever signing in. Yeah, so that's my little rant about signing in. But as you're thinking about your apps in the next year, really think like which features need sign-in, which do not. How do I separate them? And then you're prepared to make that app experience where external users who do not even have your app can fully interact with your app and eventually become customers. This is a really powerful user acquisition channel, and then you will profit. So that's it. And finally, I want to talk about user activity. So User activity is something that was introduced with handoff, I think in iOS 8. And in iOS 9, we got universal links. So if you think of that, Android instant apps that goes from your web, it goes into your app. Well, how does it do that? With iOS, you have universal links. And the hard part, I think, with universal links is more like you have to upload a JSON file to your server to make sure that the website belongs to your app. So for example, Tweetbot, you can't click a Twitter link and have it open in Tweetbot because Tweetbot cannot have the right identification for twitter.com. So that's kind of the secure part of it. But on the iOS side, all you have to do is you're looking for, in your app delegate, there's this continue user activity method, delegate method. You just check for activity type is they're browsing the web, and now you have a lot of information where you can hand off from the user who clicks on a website straight into your app, and you can give them that smooth experience. But imagine in the future that could potentially be that instant app experience hook where it goes into your app and maybe downloads that one part of it or however Apple is going to implement it. So definitely look into that, especially universal links. So universal links are also used for a ton of other things, such as Core Spotlight to show up to search your app without ever opening the app. So here we go. Here's another feature where the user never has to open your app. You can hook it up to maps. So I searched for best gelato on Foursquare, and the Foursquare created a user activity which showed up in Maps. So now when I go to Maps, I don't have to retype it. I go straight to my gelato place. You have instant reminders. You just say, remind me about this, and it knows from the context of your screen what the reminder should be. This is on contacts. WhatsApp, shows up. So you can also hook up your user activity to interact fully with contacts. So all of this was from user activity, and I'm going to show you kind of a quick example of how to use it. It's going to be slightly different for each of the things I mentioned, but they're pretty much the same. So I have a gelato finder app, and once I click into the gelato, I can go back to Core Spotlight and search for the gelato flavor. In this case, I just click on pistachio, and it's going to go into the right view controller right away. So this is just an example, but you should definitely look into user activity. So quickly, to create a user activity, you would basically create a little identifier for it. And this is meant more of as an overview, so you don't have to remember all the code. But once you have that, you have a title. The title is what shows up when the user types something in and your search comes up. That's going to be the title. You can specify which keywords you want to show up you want your app to show up. So what are the search terms? And then you can do, should it be handed off to another device? Should it be stored in activity history? Should it be public where people who don't have an account can still search your app? So this is just really easy. And finally, you have to assign it to user activity, which will make sure your activity is not deallocated. And this is a global variable on UI responder class. So it's kind of like a weird thing that works. And then you have it become active. But basically, in a few lines of code, you can create this activity. You can, if you have maps, you just add a location component. So there's a few other things. You can also save the unique information, which is really important. So since I have a list of gelatos, when it goes to my detail view controller, it has to know which gelato to show. Well, I can save that information in a user info dictionary. So here I've just added another, I made a delegate for my activity and I said it needs to be saved. And then when the delegate method is called to save the activity, I just assign it the gelato index. And then later on, it can recreate this gelato based on the index. So to restore this activity from the other side, when the user actually searches, so that's enough just for search. So now when the user searches, they click on it, it goes into my app delegate, and this is exactly the same method that I used for universal links. So it says continue user activity. I now get my main view controller that's on the screen, and then I can restore the user activity. And the restore function is pretty simple. Remember how I added the user info dictionary to my activity? Well, now just looking at the index, which is the identifier I set for it, and now using that index, I can assign it to some variable, a private variable, and I perform the segue. So in prepare for segue, I'm just looking to see is the user selected something or did they come here through a user activity? If they came through user activity, I have the index, and now using that index, I can go transition smoothly to the detail view controller. So the whole flow is, when the user, they go into Spotlight, they search for stracciatella flavor, which is index 1. It goes into my app delegate. From the app delegate, I ask my list view controller, hey, which get me the gelato for number 5, which is stracciatella. I prepare for segue. I pass that index. So overall, it's like a pretty simple process. It does involve a few steps, but creating a user activity is like not that much work, and it's so powerful because it gives you all those user acquisition channels. I recommend watching the WWDC session on increased usage of your app with proactive suggestions. And this is all the things that NS user activity can do. So it can help with your location, with the map, with searching, with universal links, with handoff, contextual reminders with Siri, can put stuff on your contacts. So this is like probably the most powerful thing that you should take away, like add user activities to your app. And once you add one, it's going to be pretty simple to add the other one because it's only a few more lines of code. So I talked today about how, rethinking your apps from being these things that are on your phone that you go to as your main kind of center of the universe, right? For us as the app developers. And instead think of it as an interconnected web of features. I talked about how Apple has added like speech recognition, extensions, notifications, and all of these, I think, is going to be moving us all towards something like instant apps where we'll have those external users. But even without that, just by implementing these things, you increase your discoverability of your app, you increase user retention, because now the user never has to remember to open your app. When they go to iMessage, your app will be there. When you go to Maps, it's going to be there. When they talk to Siri, your app is there. So you're casting this wide net of features that is in a much bigger way than just the app, the little app universe itself that you're hoping the user will remember to open. And finally, when Apple might announce more things around this next year, this is some of the things you could be doing this year to get ready, which is add frameworks, extract your model layer, decouple sign-in, start thinking about those external users, and marketing your app to them, making them use it in a pleasant experience enough that they do download it in the future. And like NS user activity, add it for something, start using it, because that hooks up to everything and increases retention and usability of your app. That's it. I'm Natasha. Build features, not apps. Okay.